I love fantasy anime. I think there's so much potential in fantasy as a genre. There's such a diverse amount of fantasy, and it comes in all shapes and sizes. To me, it is one of the most robust genres out there. The magic, the whimsy, the stories told, it is my absolute favorite genre. And with the banger fantasy that's been coming out, I thought it would be fun to write a video about fantasy anime. Now, originally, this was going to be a video about Witch Hat Atelier, but the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to go in a different direction. At first, I thought about the question, what makes magic good in anime? But the further I went, the more I wanted to answer the question, what makes a good fantasy anime? Is it the story, the magic, the world building, a combination of those and others? What makes a fantasy anime a good fantasy anime? Like, typically, a bad show will not make a good fantasy anime, but in my opinion, a good anime is not necessarily a good fantasy anime, and a bad anime can be a great fantasy. And I will go into this later, and I want to emphasize that these are all my opinions. This is not set in stone, it is what I think makes a good fantasy or bad fantasy anime. But this topic still feels so abstract and subjective that it is hard for me to pick a starting point. So how about we start with the GOAT, the gold standard of fantasy anime. Let's start with Frieren Beyond Journey's End. I've already gone into a lot of detail on Frieren in a different video, so I'm not going to get into what makes Frieren a good anime. By consensus, or at least on my anime list, it is the GOAT of fantasy anime, maybe even the GOAT of all time. But that is a conversation for another day. The question at hand is this: what makes Frieren a good fantasy anime? And I think it is so good because of its characters and world building. For its characters, there's obviously Frieren, which the show portrays with a lot of care and detail. The way they make her age, such an integral part of her being, is important, as she is an elf. And in this world, elves live for millennia, far more than normal humans. Now, other shows have done this before. Elves are kind of a staple of fantasy, and I have seen shows like Gate, for example, where elves live to be hundreds of thousands of years old, and they tell us as such. But the elves themselves don't really feel old, if you know what I mean. They don't make the character necessarily feel like they live a long time. It's just another random aspect that makes the show more of a generic fantasy. But not in Frieren's case. To her, 10 years is but a blip on the radar, and the show does a great job of hammering this aspect home. The way she interacts with humans, the way they age around her, and the way she treats time spent, everything she does makes her feel like she has all the time in the world to do stuff, and she treats the world as such. This is but a small part of how the show fleshes out her character, and the way all of her characteristics are brought together make her character feel so real and well thought out. And the same can be said about the other characters in the show as well. Take Eisen, for example. He's a dwarf, and they give and show a lot of different characteristics of a dwarf to make his character feel more real as well, like his sturdiness, his way of combat, and how he also lives longer than humans. And it's not just the good guys. The show also treats the demons of this world with a lot of care and detail as well. The way they act, their desire to kill other beings, and the way they treat power. All of these characters come together to make the world feel so alive and lived in. And the world that the characters live in feels just as alive as the characters that inhabit it. Now, the setting, to be honest, is not really that unique. It's your standard, run-of-the-mill fantasy world, set in medieval times with elves and dwarves and magic. But the world feels a lot more special because of the journey that takes place in it. You get to see the characters, how they interact with the world around them, and you get to see Frieren, Stark, and Fern go on a journey through the very lands and take the world in around them. From getting grimoires to fighting demons, the setting is perfectly made to inhabit these adventures that they go on, and the adventures they go on helps to build the world and flesh it out. I think another part of what makes the show a good fantasy show is the way they treat magic. I wouldn't say it's the centerpiece of the anime, not by a long shot, but the way they use magic and its part in this world still feels very special. From the way they use magic to strategize battles to just finding a grimoire that helps you polish copper, the magic in this world feels very well integrated into it. All the characters are always interacting with magic in some way, shape, or form. It does help that Frieren and Fern are both mainly magicians, so they are always using magic, but it is more than just that. And I think that what helps is the battles, that really sets the show's magic apart. The way magic is presented in these fights makes it feel really special, and presentation here is key. Magic in the show feels so ethereal, so out of this world. Like when they fire Zoltrak, it is just a laser, but the lighting, coloring, and highlights really make it feel like such a foreign entity, so out of this world. And the animation does the magic wonders. Like, did you see Freeman fighting in the dungeon? Absolutely spectacular. I don't really think I am even doing the magic justice with my explanation here, but the magic in this show feels really special. So then, what about a show like Witch Hat Atelier? Well, I think the same thing could be said about this show. The world building and characters are all really well done. But the thing I want to focus on in this show is the way it treats its magic. And I think this is what sets a show like this one apart from a show like Freerun. In Freerun, magic is very freeform. There's not really a system in place, so to speak, for its magic. If you can think of it, there's probably a magic for it. Now, that's not really an issue, but it does set it apart from a show like Witch Hat Atelier, which treat its magic very differently. In Witch Hat, magic adheres to a very specific system. Anyone can be a witch in that world, as long as you have the means and know how to make it possible. And because of that, witches guard magic with immense secrecy from the rest of the populace. That magic has very strict rules and regulations that restrict magic, but also make it possible. There are the 4 main forms of magic, and every single spell cast builds upon that foundation. There are small things about the magic system as well that make it feel unique and very well thought out. Like, for example, the more accurate your circle is, the more powerful your spell is. Or you can draw a partially drawn circle beforehand, and then close the circle to make it complete whenever you need to cast a spell quickly. There are small things like this that bring the magic to life. And of course, there are the big spells, the ones that make your jaw drop and say, wow. I'm not going to spoil anything because it's a very new show, but the magic in the show is absolutely beautiful. It feels so structured, so well thought out. It feels like it has substance to it. And that substance in turn affects the world that has been created around that magic system, bringing it to life, and it makes the world feel so unique and genuine. But that begs the question, is great world building what makes a good fantasy show? I don't really know about that one. Like, take Konosuba for example. That show I think can be considered a pretty good fantasy show, even though it's an isekai, but I'll get into that later. But I don't really think you can say it has good world building, or great world building at least. After all, it's your standard run-of-the-mill medieval fantasy setting, kind of like Freerun, except less well fleshed out, and definitely has less care in handling. But it is the way that they handle the setting that makes the show great. The gags with the explosion magic, how at the beginning they're getting beaten up by like normie mobs, the way Kazuma just takes everything in stride, and his personality fits really well with the setting. There are a lot of things about the anime that make it good. I don't think it's the best fantasy anime, but it's certainly not a bad one, even with the sort of weak world building. The important thing about that show is that the main characters are expressive, charismatic, and humorous, making you want to follow their journey across this fantasy land they inhabit. Or take an anime like Fate Zero. Now, the Fate franchise is like a whole mess of its own. Let's forget about how they use the franchise to peddle their gacha empire by selling you waifus, or let's forget how messy the roadmap of the franchise is.
No.
I want to only focus on Fate Zero. Now, about Fate Zero, I wouldn't say that it has the best world building. Like, it takes place in modern day Japan, and a bunch of mages come together to have like a giant battle royale or something. That is the main gist of it. And there's also like a magic association that's running the battle royale, and the church is like a mediator. There's not like a world built from the ground up like Freerun or Witch Hat Atelier. The plot and characters themselves are deep, but the world itself is not. Different heroes and masters have different magical powers, and they're fighting each other to claim the Holy Grail. The show is mainly amazing because of its plot and the characters that you follow. But I also think that the show is a great fantasy show, and part of that is the way they treat their magic. It's not just that the magic is sick as hell and fun to watch. It is the way they use magic that really makes it feel fantastical. The way they act and plan things out, the way they try to outwit or outplay the other's magic. It's not great just because they use really sick magic, but also because they strategize and play their cards in specific ways, and they're aces up their sleeves that I think makes this a great fantasy anime. The way they treat and use magic is really important. Like, take for example the fight between Saber and Lancer. The whole fight is a balancing act of who can use their cards at the right time and waiting to see what the other's magic is so that they can gain the upper hand on their opponent. Saber has her sword hidden with magic so that the reach and build of the weapon is hidden from her opponent, but the sword's design also reveals who her identity is, which will potentially reveal her trump card, so she's desperate to hide it from her opponent. But her opponent, Lancer, is also strategizing when to use the ability of his magic spears, which both have unique effects to them. But without his spear's abilities, he's not able to gain the upper hand. So the whole fight is them trying to force their opponent's hand and forcing them to use their trump cards, or reveal their hidden identity and their magic abilities. Or take the fight between the masters of Saber and Lancer. When they fight, Lancer's master is overly cocky and thinks that Saber's master has no chance, so he's blatant and unwieldy with his magic, not even bothering to hide his abilities. He uses the ability to control Mercury, and uses that to sense his opponent or block his opponent's attacks and stuff. And then there's Saber's master, who has the ability to accelerate and decelerate his own time. So he uses that to dodge his opponent's attacks. But he has a hidden trump card, and the whole fight is him trying to bait his opponent into a trap so that he can use that trump card. I won't go into spoilers, but the fight is sick. And then there's the Reality Marble, which to those who are not familiar with it, it is the OG domain expansion, before domain expansion was even a thing. The user traps their opponents inside a barrier where they manifest a mental landscape and can use their magic to the fullest abilities. And these are all really sick. It's the scale and scope of the magic that makes it so cool. Truly befitting of a trump card that the servants can whip out at any moment. The magic of Fate Zero feels so well integrated into the world that the characters inhabit. It feels like it's second nature to the characters and is ingrained in the strategies and actions that each character uses. For lack of a better term, it makes the magic in the world feel real. So then, what makes a fantasy anime so good must be the way that the anime uses magic then, right? There are so many fantasy shows that feel so special because of the way they treat their magic or power system. Lots of shonens feel special because of this very aspect. Take for example a show like Hunter x Hunter, set in a fantasy world that feels sort of like a futuristic version of Earth, but part of what makes this show special, and potentially the GOAT of shonen anime, is because its power system is so well established, throughout, and executed, that it leaves all others in the dust. Like, Nen is such a complicated power system with general applications that can be used, like Gyo, Ten, and Zetsu, but then each character has their own specialization as well, with 6 different categories that people fit into. And even within those categories, there are so many different types of ways you can go that it's mind-boggling. This power system is what makes a show like Hunter x Hunter special. It is that show's form of magic, even if it does not really feel like magic. Not all power systems have to be that unique or feel deep for the show to feel special either. I think some good examples of this are shows like Naruto, One Piece, and Bleach, or even a show like Fairy Tail. It's not like those shows have super thought out power systems. A lot of them are just, hey, check out this cool power, and whatever you think off the top of your head is probably it. But the way the powers are treated, how they are integrated into the world, that makes them special. Say what you will about a plot and power scaling of a show like Naruto, but the way that ninjutsu is incorporated into the world and setting feels seamless. It feels just like an extension of that world, and the strategies, the battles, the fight choreography all make for a spectacular spectacle. And same with Bleach and One Piece, especially One Piece. I think that the Devil Fruits are such a cool power system, even if it feels very random at times. The powers are also creative, and with the plot and the masterful world building of the show, you cannot wait to see what happens next. So then, it must be the way magic or powers are handled in these fantasies, right? Well, maybe. But at the same time, that's not necessarily a must-have either. Take, for example, my favorite anime, Made in Abyss. There's no magic, no power system, or anything like that. They have machines and mechanical stuff, but nothing like a conventional fantasy would have. But it is such an amazing fantasy anime because of the world the characters inhabit. The whole that the characters explore is full of wonder and spectacle. So many different creatures, different environments, different horrors. This world feels like it's been built from the ground up. So much thought and care went into the environments and creatures in the adventures that the main characters go on. And you begin this adventure by going down this giant hole into a fantastic and majestic environment unlike anything out there in anime. And the more you delve into this world, the more you want to explore this new world, to see what lies beyond each level, to see what fantastical horrors and creatures dwell within this chasm. It is truly a unique experience and one of the best fantasy animes out there. For real, the world building in Made in Abyss is truly in a league of its own. Each level of the hole has its own unique biomes and monsters, from small bugs to flying monstrosities, and each level down is like a descent further and further into hell, an absolutely beautiful and otherworldly hell. I know one of the themes of the anime is beauty in horror, and the show captures that essence so masterfully, which each encounter that Reg and Rico face, each monster that stands in their way, and each time they face a trial that seems too difficult to scale. It truly is one of the greatest experiences out there, and is my GOAT anime for sure. Or what about a show like Osama Ranking? A show about a kid who is deaf and mute, but seeks out to become the greatest king ever. That show has some magic, but to be honest, the magic is basically negligible. There's more fighting with melee weapons if anything. But why is it so good? Because of the other fantastical elements of the show and the characters, like Boji and Kage. Their journey together as partners makes this show so great to watch. To watch Boji develop as a character and fight through his weaknesses to become stronger, and Kage learning to cope with the loss of his loved ones, and yet still tries to support Boji as much as possible. And the other characters are great too, and the other fantastical elements, like the demon and the river of the dead, the undead soldier, and the setting as a whole, the medieval setting with a king ranking system, the devil that gives power but at a high price. I think that as a whole, it makes for a pretty good fantasy anime. So then, what does make a good fantasy anime? Well, I think to answer that, we might need to look in a different direction, which I alluded to earlier. What is a show that might not be a great show, but it is a good fantasy anime? And on the flip side, what is a pretty good or decent show that is not necessarily a good fantasy anime? Let's start with the first one, a show that is not that great, but is a good fantasy show. Honestly, for both examples, it's pretty hard to think of one because usually good shows and good fantasy go hand in hand, with any genre really. If the show is bad, then it's a bad show of that genre usually, and vice versa. But I can think of two examples where a show might not be too good, but is a good fantasy show. Those shows are A Certain Magical Index and The Irregular at Magic High School. Now, for A Certain Magic Index, I've always had a soft spot for it since it was one of the first shows I watched early on, but I will admit I don't think it's that good of a show. The main protagonist Toma is really annoying and he ruins most of the show for me as the main character. The side characters are kind of annoying as well and the plot kind of feels all over the place. Its counterpart, A Certain Scientific Railgun, does things right, but the main show just feels inferior compared to that one. I won't get too into the weeds here, the point is, I don't think that the show is very good. So then why do I think it's a great fantasy show? Because of the world that is built around our protagonist. And this is sort of helped by A Certain Scientific Railgun, but as the main show, I still think the world building of the show is pretty good. The show is able to blend sci-fi with magic so well. And all of that is focused into the setting, Academy City. A city that is 20 to 30 years ahead of its time, and houses a blend of espers and normal people, with magicians constantly coming into and out of the city as well. And the powers of the world truly feel unique. Take the espers for example. Unlike typical shonen, the powers from the espers don't come from a single magic system or are like correlated with emotions or a randomly generated power. Their powers are all scientific and are based on how many calculations you can do at a time. It's not the people with the most brawn or emotions or whatever is usually in shonen anime. It is how smart you are that makes the difference. And there are other aspects of the show and the magic of this world, if I remember correctly, that are also pretty unique. And adding together all of the politics behind magic and the politics of the Academy City, it makes the world feel so unique and cool. I don't necessarily think I'm doing the world justice when I explain it because the world and politics are complicated, and also it's been a while since I've seen it, I will admit. But I think that the world they set up and the inhabitants of the city make the world they have created so interesting. And the same thing can be said about The Irregular at Magic High School. Now, I will admit, I am a little biased because I read the novels before I watched the anime, but I think that the setting and world building of the show is pretty cool. Set in the future in the year like 2200 or something, somewhere around that, I don't know, where magic has taken over as the powerhouse of the military. The main character is a student at a magic high school where he learns about magic. And I say learn really loosely because he's like a super genius and everything. You know what? It doesn't matter. What matters is the world around them. Set in the future, everything is super sci-fi and advanced. It's all cool, but the main thing that sets its world apart is its magic. Here, magic adheres to a complicated system. Think of it like writing code. There needs to set an advanced setup of logic with their magic to affect the world around them. Like the main character explains early on, for example, to move an egg, it's not just about giving it a force and then sending it flying. You need to set a starter function, then set acceleration, then set deceleration for the egg when it's about to reach the table, then slow it down into the place where you want it to end up, or else the egg will break due to too much force. And the magic is built around this kind of logic. There's like situations where multiple people cannot cast spells on the same object, there's dispersion, reading the very code of magic, and so much more. I'm not doing it justice, but the world building around this magic is really interesting, and I think is what makes it a great fantasy anime. Combined with all of the politics around magic, involving different countries, and the 10 families in Japan, it makes the world and its magic really interesting. With the right plot and animation, this anime could have been pretty good. And why is it not? Well, one big part of it, and I cannot stress this enough, one of the biggest reasons why this show sucks ass is because the stupid brother-sister rom-com shit. Like, I cannot get over this. The world, the magic, everything is so cool, and then it just gets ruined by this bro-sis rom-com bullshit. Like, why does this exist? If you took out the romance bullshit, the show would be, like, okay. Yes, it's got other problems that it could fix, like the animation quality, the characters themselves being kind of monotone and boring, and so on. But I think that the biggest reason it's kind of mid is because they just had to include this stupid brother-sister romance shit, and it just fucks everything over. And the harem aspect is also annoying, but like, whatever. Nothing ruins the show like the brother-sister bullshit. Sorry about the tangent. Anyways, while those two are examples of bad or only okay shows with good fantasy settings, there's the flip side of that, where we have good shows that are pretty good, but I think are not great fantasy shows. The first one I can think of off the top of my head is Yojo Senki. Yojo Senki is a pretty decent show, but take that with a grain of salt because I had not seen it in a while. If I recall though, it's a pretty decent show. It follows the plot of a guy who gets reincarnated into a world that is basically like ours, but they use magic and warfare, and he gets dropped into the equivalent of Germany in World War I. And it follows his, who is now her, tale of her climbing up the ranks, and there's something about God and stuff, you know what, it doesn't really matter. It's a good show, but not really a good fantasy show. The reason? The fantasy aspect of the show feels really weak. It's just, hey, what if there was magic in World War I? Like, there's no mystery to it. No system, no fantasy really, because the magic is used for the same exact thing as every other weapon in existence has been used for, blowing people up. It's not special. It does not feel fantastical at all, if you know what I mean. If they just took the magic out of the show would be the exact same, just with a more historical essence, if anything. Again, I don't think it's a bad show by any means, and I cannot wait to see season 2. But as far as season 1 goes, the fantasy elements of the show are kind of weak. It's more about following the main character rise through the ranks and fight this war, as well as the politics and following this world that is similar to World War I era that makes the show interesting, not the fantasy part. Same with a show like Yona of the Dawn. It's a pretty good show. Yona, the main character, is a princess who gets betrayed by her childhood friend / crush and gets exiled from the kingdom that she was a princess in. Her and another childhood friend who has a crush on her, they go on the run, and along their journey throughout the kingdom they discover and meet 4 other people who are actually dragons that have reincarnated as humans to serve and protect her, who is a reincarnation of the OG king they originally had a contract with. As an anime, it's pretty decent. There's like a love triangle thing going on between the childhood friends, the fights are fun, the plot is about Yona learning about the world that she was sheltered from, and traveling with the 4 dragons is pretty decently fun. However, is it a good fantasy show? I'm not too sure about that one, and that's because there's barely a fantasy element to the show. Like, the dragons' powers are not that crazy or anything. In fact, for 2 of the 4 dragons, you could literally replace them with just really strong humans, and the other 2, their fantastical powers rarely come up, especially in the anime. And like, the childhood friend that escaped from her has been constantly shown to be just as strong as the dragons, so there's no doubt you could just replace the dragons with just 4 really strong humans, and it would not make a difference. And that is fine. The show is again more about Yona traveling the lands, learning about the people of her kingdom and growing as a person, and searching for the reason she was betrayed. It does not really need a strong fantasy element to it. But at the end of the day, I don't think it makes for a great fantasy show. So then, what makes a fantasy show bad? I think we can look no further than like 50% of isekai anime and even some of what I would call isekai adjacent. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good isekai, and there are plenty of good isekai anime out there. Overlord, The Slime Isekai, ReZero, even a show like Eminence in Shadow. All good isekais that I think are pretty decent fantasy animes. But with every good isekai comes a bad one. And what makes all of these mediocre ones so bad in terms of fantasy? Well, to me, it's how they treat their worlds. To them, their worlds are nothing but settings for the main characters to move around in. They feel just like props. Things just there for the sake of making it a fantasy setting. And these props are so wildly unoriginal and uninteresting. You know what I'm talking about. Those shows where there's a generic fantasy setting, where the magic is super basic, just like shooting fireballs and ice, and every now and then there's an interesting power, but not really. There's your standard medieval setting, with swords, shields, bows, etc. Your standard guild setting, where there are adventurers that take up quests and then go into dungeons with goblins and stuff and kill stuff, and then collect things and return to the guild to get rewards. And like half the time the magic is based on video games, so there are like stats and stuff the main character can level up, and oftentimes they have a list of abilities that they can call out or think, and they will do that ability, kind of like a video game. It's all your usual standard fare. It's not just that the settings are generic, or that the magic system feels uninspired. It is also that the systems of the world and the settings don't fit well with each other. They feel separated and a lot of the times unnecessary. They feel shoehorned in just because it is something that is expected of that setting to have. Take for example, the old man country bumpkin turned into master swordsman anime. God, that's a mouthful. While it is not an isekai, it's what I call isekai adjacent. And why? Because the setting and the magic system are basically the same as your standard uninspired isekai anime. It is your usual medieval setting with a really standard magic system. And while the show is not bad per se, it is in my opinion a bad fantasy anime. It is barely fantasy. The magic is so generic and feels so disconnected from the rest of the show. It barely shows up except for some conversations and feels like it does not affect the rest of the setting whatsoever. If the magic did not exist, the world would be the exact same thing. Like, it is so forgetful, I actually had to go back and rewatch sections of the show to make sure there was even magic in the show. That's how forgetful and uninspiring it is. And that is how it feels for all of these awful isekai and isekai adjacent anime. Just uninspiring garbage. Also, before I move on, some of the names for the isekai or isekai adjacent shows are hella whack. Like, look at this one. There was a cute girl in the hero's party, so I tried confessing to her. Like, really? You could not think of a better name than that? Also, some of these premises are also really weird. Like, reborn as a vending machine. I now wander the dungeon. Like, what the fuck? I also know that there's an isekai out there about a girl who's like a prostitute in an isekai. Like, what are these people smoking when they come up with these ideas? Like, they must have just like a dartboard with a bunch of random ass ideas and are just like, okay guys, whatever the dart hits, we release a new show with that premise. Got it? Alright, we just got a guy isekai'd into the world as a vending machine. Sounds good, let's go with that. Every now and then, there will be a way to make things more interesting or elevate the show. I mean, like free rent. I already said the setting is not that interesting, but it is what they do with the cards they have that elevates the show to a masterpiece. Or, take a show like Eminence in Shadow. By all accounts, the show is not original in the slightest. There's your typical fantasy setting, a main character that is super OP, your standard harem fare, the usual stuff. But the show is so much fun, and that is because of how they use the setting and characters and plot that makes the show feel so original. Take the main character for example. You think he's your standard isekai protagonist? Think again. In his past life in everyday Tokyo, he sought out to be the strongest there is. But in the normal world, no matter how strong you are, if an atom bomb hits you or a missile hits you, if you're faced with a firing squad, you will die. You are not strong enough because of the limits of the normal world. But what if you could use magic? What if you could become the missile or the atomic bomb? And so the main character gets into an accident and reincarnates. And in this new world, he sets out to become the strongest. He becomes the missile. he becomes Or take the harem aspect of this anime. The main character rescues the first member of his harem early on in his new life, an elf suffering from a magical disease who he names Alpha. He then rescues more and more females who he gives different names, and those people rescue more and more females, and he ends up accidentally creating a super secret harem who are all super powerful and wield magic insanely well, which is named Shadow Garden. And when I say harem, I mean harem. Like, all of these women would, without a second of hesitation, throw themselves at his feet, no questions asked. If he asked to sleep with any of them, they would not hesitate to accept on the spot. He's literally made the world's largest harem of super attractive, super strong women.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
And yet, he is so edgy that he does not accept their advances. He does not give in to the goonage. He is above that. He's on that Sigma male grind set to become the best mob character to ever exist. He only cares about his goal to become the man in the shadow. And our thoughts part of that equation? Hell nah. So he rejects them. He ignores their advances. He is the Sigma male. Okay, but what does all of this have to do with fantasy anime? Because the show is so excellent because it takes all of the conventional things that you have seen in a generic fantasy anime and subverts your expectations. It uses the world that it has created and treats it like a running gag. And that's what sets it apart from other generic fantasy animes out there and makes it a great fantasy anime. It doesn't really make you think or doesn't have a deep message. It lets you turn your brain off and just have a blast, watching magical battles and the main character, Sid, just being oblivious to everything in front of him. And maybe that's what makes a good fantasy anime. It's not just about good world building or good magic. It's about how the world that has been created is treated, how the characters act in this world, how they interact with it, and how they and the writing is used to flesh out this world. Like, take a look at an anime like Clevitus. By all accounts, it has those fantasy elements that we all sort of expect. There are dwarves and elves, magic swords that spew out different kinds of magic, mythical creatures and dragons, but it is the way that the characters and monsters interact, the way the world is built up, and how the magic is used that makes this show a good fantasy anime. Clevitus is a great vehicle to drive the plot. As a mythical creature, it can shapeshift and has the ability to revive people. His actions to take care of the child that he discovers and revive the fallen female hero moves the plot forward, and helps the viewer to engage with the fantasy elements of the show more. This allows the female protagonist to repeatedly revive and use that to her advantage. It forces the villains and the heroes to move based on the gravity of power that is Clevitus, and forces the villains to go out and try and imprison him, and reveals how the magical forge that creates the magic weapons works, and influences how the rulers of different kingdoms act. The very core of the storytelling is the fantasy creature that dominates the wasteland, and the show treats it as such. And I think one of the best examples of an anime that doesn't have just great world building, but treats its world and magic system with special care, is a show like Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Fullmetal Alchemist is an amazing anime. I think we can all agree on that. There's a reason it was #1 on my anime list for the longest time. But what makes it a great fantasy anime? I believe it has to do with how the world has been built and how it is treated. More specifically, how the show treats its magic system. The magic system of this world is alchemy. Using magic circles, they transmute matter to shape it how they please, whether it be walls, weapons, fire, ice, you name it. Alchemy is at the center of everything. Whether it is the fighting, the characters, the world, alchemy dominates all aspects of the anime, even its themes and messaging. The world feels so real and genuine because alchemy is treated so specially. Alchemy in this world adheres to very strict rules. You need to give something to create something, and must create a circle of alchemy in order to use alchemy. And everything around the system is pretty simple, but the anime uses that simplicity to create one of the most robust and incredible magical systems out there. Want to create giant walls of ice using the city's waterways? Go right ahead. Want to shoot giant fireballs at people? Go right ahead, as long as you have the right gear for it. Want to transmute humans and turn their souls into philosopher's stones that can break the rules and create stuff from nothing? That itself is also part of the rules of the game. The system is so interesting and dominates every aspect of the world that is built, including how the characters act, their motivations, and those around them. Especially the Philosopher's Stones. That is the driving force behind the main character's actions and goals. In this world, alchemy is everything, and the use of alchemy really pushes the world forward, as well as the themes of the world, of human desire, of sin and want, and of sacrifice. It really is a part of every aspect of the show, and shows how a show that it really values its fantasy aspects can shine as one of the greatest pieces of anime ever created. So yeah, I believe it's not just about world building, not just about having a magic system. It's about how the world is treated and how it treats its magic system, how it uses the tools it has to elevate the world to something special. It's about how the world has set up its fantasy elements, how well integrated they are into the story, and how irreplaceable those fantasy elements are to the world and story being told. There are plenty of other fantasy anime I can go into. Shinsekai Yori, Gachiakuta, Magi, Sentenced to be a Hero, Death Parade, Overlord, Zetsuan no Tempest, Little Witch Academia. There will never be any lack of fantasy anime, both good and bad. The genre is ever evolving, ever changing, and with the new fantasy anime coming out, like Frieren Season 3, Witch Hat Season 2, Siren, Dungeon Meshi, Solo Leveling, Omniscient Reader, and Kagurabachi, the future of anime is looking brighter than ever. Fantasy anime is not going anywhere anytime soon. I love fantasy anime, and I cannot wait to see what fantasy comes out with in the future. Thank you all for watching till the end. The video took me a long time to write, and it's definitely the longest video I've done so far. I put a lot of time and effort into the video. It took around a month of on and off writing for me to finish the script. I would really appreciate the support. Please check out my Patreon page, and if you could please leave a like and subscribe, or if you have some feedback for me on how to improve my videos, please leave a comment. Again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.